The billionaire walked into the back corridor of his mansion, expecting silence. Instead, he found a small boy crouched behind a trash bin, eating leftover food with shaking hands. The boy froze. The billionaire froze. And in that moment, everything in Alexander Montclair's past collided with his present. He wasn't just looking at a terrified child. He was looking at himself. A memory he swore he'd buried had returned, in the form of his Maid's starving son. This is the story of how one forbidden discovery shattered an empire of silence, and how a single act of kindness rewritten by fate changed 3 lives forever. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Where are you watching from? Drop your comment below, like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The Montclair estate didn't look real. People drove past it the way tourists stare at ancient monuments, with awe, confusion, and a whisper of something between envy and disbelief. The mansion stretched across several acres, wrapped in manicured gardens and fountains that never stopped running, even at night. Inside, the white marble floors were so polished they reflected the chandeliers above like pools of golden light. Art pieces that cost more than some homes hung on the walls. Every door was carved with precision. Every room smelled faintly of lavender, money, and a life untouched by struggle. This was the world of Alexander Montclair, billionaire investor, strategic genius, polished public figure. Cold, controlled, calculated. The world respected him. The news adored him. His rivals feared him. But few knew the truth. That Alexander's immaculate empire had 2 layers, the one on display, and the one hidden in the quiet corners. And no corner was quieter than the staff corridor. A narrow, dim hallway tucked behind the main dining wing. It smelled faintly of disinfectant, laundry steam, and the comforting, lingering scent of soup from the staff meals. This corridor was a different universe. The floors weren't marble, they were old tile. The walls weren't decorated, they were plain and sometimes peeling. The air wasn't perfumed, it was heavy with work and exhaustion. This was where Carla, the maid, lived her life. She moved like a shadow, precise, silent, unseen. Her hands were cracked from detergents, her back sore from years of cleaning up after people who never learned her name. Only a handful of staff bothered to say, "Good morning," and even then, it was out of habit more than kindness. Carla had a son, Diego, 11 years old. Too thin, too quiet, too aware. He had big, dark eyes that saw things children shouldn't have to see, and a smile he rarely showed. His mother often said that Diego had learned to grow up the moment life stopped giving him a childhood. Officially, he did not live at the estate. Employees weren't allowed to bring children except in dire emergencies. But rules are made by people who don't live with consequences the way the poor do. And Carla had no choice. She didn't have money for a babysitter. She didn't have family nearby. She didn't have anyone. On good days, a neighbor watched him. On bad days, like today, the neighbor disappeared for hours, usually drunk or sleeping off the night before. Carla stared at her son as she tucked him into the tiny staff room hidden at the far end of the corridor. The room was barely big enough for a cot and a small shelf, meant for cleaning supplies, not a child. "Diego," she said gently, cupping his cheek, "I need you to stay here. Don't make noise. Don't wander. Don't go near the main kitchen. Promise me. Please." Diego nodded obediently. "I promise, Mama." He always promised. He always meant it. But hunger has a way of breaking promises. Carla kissed the top of his head, whispering, "I'll bring something to you when I can." She shut the door behind her. And Diego was alone again. Hours passed. The mansion above buzzed with life, laughter, clinking glasses, the footsteps of servers and guests coming together for an extravagant private dinner hosted by Alexander Montclair himself. The smell drifted through the corridors like a taunt. Roasted lamb, buttery potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables glazed with honey, miniature desserts arranged like sparkling jewels. For the wealthy upstairs, these dishes were part of an ordinary evening. A meeting, a negotiation, a backdrop to billion-dollar conversations. For Diego, crouched in a dark staff room, each drifting scent felt like a memory of something beautiful and unreachable. His stomach growled loudly. He pressed both hands against it. He hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. His mother tried, always tried, but meals had become smaller, thinner, less frequent. The staff room felt colder today, emptier, lonely. Time felt slow. His hunger felt loud. He curled his knees to his chest, trying to distract himself. But then, the sound of laughter grew louder. The scent of roasted meat thickened in the air. Plates clattered. Cooks shouted instructions. Luxury filled the mansion like a feast on a king's table. The Montclair dining room glowed like the sun had descended into the house itself. Crystal glasses shimmered under warm chandelier light. A long polished mahogany table stretched toward the windows, laden with dishes that looked almost theatrical in their perfection. Roasted lamb glistening with herbs, creamy mashed potatoes folded with butter, fresh bread with golden crusts, grilled vegetables arranged like art, desserts crafted with meticulous detail. Laughter echoed loudly, too loudly, from the men gathered around the table. Important men. Powerful men. Men whose forks barely scraped the food placed in front of them because their real appetite was for numbers, deals, and dominance. Alexander Montclair sat at the head of the table, half listening to a partner brag about offshore investments. His mind wandered, as it often did, not because the conversation was dull, but because something inside him never felt full. His eyes drifted toward one dish being cleared by a server, a whole lamb portion, untouched except for a single polite slice. He felt a faint tug inside his chest, the ghost of a memory he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years. But he pushed it down, burying it under wine, numbers, and adult importance. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the staff worked like gears in a machine. Fast, efficient, invisible. Carla moved among them, scrubbing pans, scraping plates, and moving from one station to another with practiced speed. Every time a dish came back barely touched, something twisted deep inside her. A half-eaten potato, half a lamb chop, 2 perfect rolls of bread. Food her son would have cried from joy to taste. Her hands scrubbed harder. She blinked fast, pushing away thoughts of Diego in the staff room, eyes tired, stomach empty, chewing that piece of dry bread she'd saved for him. She could smell the food too. The butter, the rosemary, the caramelized edges of vegetables. Her throat tightened, and suddenly the kitchen felt suffocating. Because she knew this world. She knew its habits. When the plates came back, the leftovers always went into the same place. The trash bins. Still warm. Still edible. Still good enough to feed 10 families. But here, food was not food. It was decoration. It was an accessory to power. It was disposable. One by one, large handfuls of perfectly good food slid off the plates and into the bins with dull, heavy thuds. Carla swallowed a sob she couldn't release. Diego would give anything for this. But she wasn't allowed to take leftovers home. There were cameras, rules, policies written to protect the estate's image. She turned away quickly, forcing herself to focus on her work. But her hands shook. Her son was starving, and she was surrounded by abundance. Her heart cracked. Down the staff corridor, Diego curled tighter into himself. His stomach groaned so painfully he felt tears sting his eyes. He pressed his hands into his belly, as if pressure would silence the ache. The smells from the kitchen drifted in waves, wrapping around him like cruel temptation. He tried counting to distract himself. He tried humming softly. He tried sleeping. But hunger is louder than comfort. He opened the door a tiny bit and listened. Voices echoed far away, rushing, busy, too distracted to notice a small boy walking through the halls. His breath came shaky. "Mama wouldn't want me to," he whispered to himself. But he also remembered the last real meal he had eaten. One slice of toast. Some beans. Nothing more. His body felt weak, legs shaky with each step before he even took it. Just a little food. Just one bite. His promise cracked. His hunger pushed him forward. And Diego stepped into the corridor. Silent. Invisible. Driven by need. The staff corridor was quiet, the household noise reduced to distant clatters and muffled conversation. Diego walked carefully, his small footsteps barely making a sound on the old tile floor. He paused at the corner, peeking toward the main kitchen. He saw servers rushing past, carrying plates, swapping trays, clearing dishes. Their pace was frantic, focused. "They won't see me," he told himself. This wasn't the first time he had snuck a look around, though he had never gone as far as he was going now. As hunger gnawed deeper, the fear held less power. He slipped forward, hugging the wall, moving behind rolling carts stacked with trays. The noise from the kitchen masked the quiet shuffling of his feet. Then, he reached the doorframe leading to the back of the kitchen. He froze. There they were. The bins. Tall, metal, intimidating in their size, but filled with the very thing his body screamed for. Diego approached slowly, carefully, as if the bins themselves might scream at him. He stood on his toes, peeking inside. Bread. A potato. A piece of lamb. Still warm. His throat tightened painfully. He reached out with shaking fingers, the creamy smashed potatoes, the food clean, untouched by anything other than the plate it came from, and held it to his lap. Just holding it made him want to cry. He crouched behind the bin, hiding from the world, and took a spoon. Warm. Soft. Real food. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't devour it like an animal. He ate slowly, carefully, savoring every bite like a precious gift. He knew he shouldn't be here. He knew he was risking everything. He knew his mother would be terrified. But hunger doesn't wait. He had never wanted to eat this way. Never. He closed his eyes and took another spoon. In that moment, he felt relief, a relief so strong he didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Not until a sudden shift in the air. A presence. A shadow falling over him. Diego froze. The spawn still on his hand. Heart slamming against his ribs. Slowly, trembling, he turned his head and looked straight into the eyes of Alexander Montclair. Minutes earlier, on the other side of the estate, Alexander Montclair stood in the foyer as his guests' cars pulled away. He loosened his tie, exhaling a long, tired breath. It had been a productive evening, full of deals, laughter, and financial triumphs. And yet, something gnawed at him. A discomfort he couldn't name. He walked slowly back toward the dining room, glancing at the plates still sitting there. Plates barely touched, full of food destined for the trash. A heaviness tugged at him. Why tonight? Why that old feeling again? He rubbed his brow, annoyed at himself for even thinking about it. He wasn't a sentimental man. He didn't indulge nostalgia. He didn't revisit pain. But a memory, sharp and unwanted, rose from the depths like a ghost. A younger him. Skinny. Cold. Digging through a restaurant dumpster. Searching for bruised fruit and stale bread. The ache of hunger. The shame of being caught. The moment a stranger changed everything with one simple act. Kid, if you're hungry, don't eat from there. Come inside. Alexander swallowed hard. He shook the memory away and headed toward the study. But he couldn't take more than 3 steps. His feet stopped on their own. Something was wrong. Someone, was pulling him toward the kitchen without explanation. He followed the tension in his chest, down the hall, past the dining room, past the bustling kitchen where the last of the cleanup was underway. "Where's Carla?" he asked one of the staff sharply. "She stepped out, sir," the woman replied. "To the back of the kitchen. I think she was checking the bins." Alexander nodded and kept moving. He turned the corner, stepped through the back doorway, and froze. A small boy sat crouched behind the trash bin, thin, shaking, carrying a half-eaten plate of smashed potatoes like it was treasure. The spoon slipped slightly in his tiny fingers as he looked up, wide-eyed, terrified, ashamed. Alexander's breath caught. The mansion disappeared. Time disappeared. The billionaire disappeared. All he saw was himself at that age. Hungry, desperate, alone. Nothing in his empire prepared him for this moment. And Diego felt it, the dizzying pull of survival. His mother had warned him, begged him, made him promise. But the body listens to hunger before it listens to rules. For several long seconds, the world didn't breathe. The powerful, untouchable billionaire Alexander Montclair and the starving, trembling boy hiding behind a trash bin stared at each other in complete silence. Diego's first instinct was pure panic. His heart thrashed wildly in his chest, pounding so hard it felt like his ribs might crack. He scrambled backward until his shoulders hit the cold tile wall. The piece of food slipped from his hands and landed on the floor with a soft thud. I'm sorry, Diego blurted. I wasn't stealing, I swear. It was in the trash. I wasn't going to take anything good. I'm sorry. His words collided, tangled, tripped over each other as tears blurred his vision. He expected yelling. He expected anger. He expected the booming voice of the mansion's owner crashing over him like thunder. But instead, Alexander didn't move. Not toward him. Not away. He just stared. Not in disgust. Not in fury. In recognition. His face softened in a way no one in his adult world ever saw. His jaw trembled, just slightly. He took one small step closer, then slowly lowered himself to one knee. The billionaire knelt on the cold tile floor, before a starving boy behind a trash bin. The staff, if they walked in right now, would be struck speechless. Diego expected punishment. Instead, Alexander's voice came low. Gentle. Careful. What's your name? The boy hesitated, confused by the tone. Diego. Alexander nodded slowly, absorbing the answer. Diego, he said the name again, as if testing the weight of it. Who are you here with? My mom, the boy whispered, sniffing. She works here. She's a maid. She told me not to be here. Please don't fire her. It's my fault. I'm the one who... Stop, Alexander said softly. The boy froze again. You're hungry, the billionaire added quietly. That's not a crime. Diego shook his head, eyes filled with shame. My mom will get in trouble. Please don't tell anyone. I won't do it again, I promise. I'll stay in the room. Alexander held up a hand. You're a child, he said. Children shouldn't be this hungry. Children shouldn't be hiding behind trash bins to eat food that should have never been thrown away. Diego's lip trembled. His eyes fell to the floor. You're not angry, the boy whispered. Alexander swallowed hard. No, Diego. I'm not angry. He paused. I'm ashamed. The boy looked up sharply, confused. Alexander's eyes glistened with something Diego didn't have a name for, pain that had lived in him for decades. He reached down, picked up the lamb from the floor, and dropped it gently into the bin. Not in disgust, but like he was burying a ghost. Then he said, voice trembling, I used to do the same thing. Diego blinked, startled. What? I was your age, Alexander continued. Hungry. Hiding. Eating whatever I could find. I know exactly what that feels like. Diego stared at him, not with fear anymore, but disbelief. You, he whispered. The billionaire nodded. A heavy quiet settled between them. One man seeing his childhood reflected in another. One boy seeing a future he never thought possible. Then, just beyond the door, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Carla. Her voice cracked in fear before she even reached them. Diego. She burst into the room and froze at the sight. Her son on the ground. The billionaire kneeling beside him. Her breath left her body like she'd been punched. Mr. Montclair. Carla gasped, stumbling forward. Sir, I'm so sorry. He wasn't supposed to be here. He's not allowed back here. Please don't. Her voice broke. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the metal counter for support, trembling violently. I'll take him right now, she choked out. I'll keep him out of the mansion. I'll find someone else to watch him. Please don't fire me. He's just hungry, sir. I didn't want him to eat from the trash. I should have watched him better. Carla. Alexander's voice cut through her panic like warm steel. She froze mid-sentence. Her breathing erratic. Eyes wide and terrified. He stood slowly, dusting off his pant leg where he'd knelt. You did nothing wrong. Carla stared at him, trembling. What? The mistake tonight, Alexander said, eyes serious, was mine. Carla shook her head violently. No, sir, it wasn't. Yes, Carla, he said firmly, stepping closer. It was. Her lips trembled, unsure whether this was a trick or a test. Alexander looked between the mother and son, both exhausted, frightened, bearing the weight of poverty like a silent curse. How long have you been bringing him here? He asked. Carla swallowed hard. Only when I have no one to watch him. I keep him hidden. He doesn't cause trouble. I can't leave him alone at home. I can't afford childcare. I'm doing everything I can. And it's not enough, she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. I know it's not enough. Her knees gave out. She collapsed fully to the floor, breaking into sobs she had held back for months. Diego rushed to her. Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry. Carla pulled him into her arms, hugging him tightly. Alexander watched them, the shaky, desperate love of a mother doing her best with nothing. It hit him harder than he expected. He knelt again, slower this time, not before a child, but before a family burdened by the same struggles he once knew too well. Both of you listen to me, he said, voice low, steady, and full of something rare in his world, compassion. You are not in trouble. Carla gasped. Sir, you're not losing your job, he continued. Carla's breath hitched. Tears spilled down her cheeks. And Diego, Alexander added, turning to him, is never eating from a trash bin again. The boy swallowed, stunned. Carla whispered, But why are you doing this? Alexander looked at her with tired eyes. Because when I was his age, he said, someone found me in the exact same situation. He told them the story. The dumpster. The hunger. The shame. And the restaurant owner who took him inside instead of yelling. The man who fed me that night, Alexander said, changed the course of my entire life. He stood again, jaw tight with emotion. I've been living off the interest of that one act of kindness ever since. Carla covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Diego stared at the billionaire as if seeing him for the first time, not as the owner of a mansion, but as a human being. A human who understood his hunger. And for the first time, hope, real hope, flickered. Silence lingered after Alexander finished speaking. The kind of silence that holds history inside it. The kind that divides life into a before and after. Carla wiped her tears, still disbelieving. Mr. Montclair, I don't understand. What do you want to do? Alexander took a deep breath. He looked at Diego, thin, shaking, hair messy, eyes too old for 11. And he made a choice. Starting tomorrow, Alexander said, Diego no longer hides in a tiny room. Carla's breath caught. He will eat in the staff dining area, at a table, with real meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Diego blinked in shock. And, Alexander continued, if you're willing, Carla, I want to help enroll him in a proper school, not the overcrowded public one he probably attends. Carla's hand flew to her chest. A proper school? Alexander nodded. Private, safe, good teachers, paid in full. Carla nearly collapsed again. Diego whispered, Mama, is he serious? Carla could barely speak. I think he is, Mijo. Alexander crouched again, so he was eye level with Diego. You're a smart boy, he said. I can see it. You remind me of myself at your age. But you need a real chance, not scraps from a bin. Diego felt his throat close. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever believed in him like this. Carla wiped her eyes again. Sir, why us? Alexander rested a hand gently on Diego's shoulder. Because fate repeats itself, he said quietly. And when it does, you either break the cycle, or you become the reason someone else suffers the same story. He paused. My story repeated tonight. But this time, I'm choosing the ending. Carla sobbed into her hands, not from fear, but from relief so overwhelming it felt like a tidal wave. Diego stepped closer to Alexander. Thank you, he whispered, voice shaking. I won't waste this. I promise. Alexander smiled faintly. I know, he said. For the first time in decades, Alexander felt something warm spread in his chest. Not pride. Not power. Not wealth. Something far more valuable. Redemption. The moment the trash bin became a doorway, not to shame, but to a future he never imagined for the boy who reminded him so much of himself. Word travels fast in big houses. By the next morning, the Montclair estate felt different. The air in the staff corridor carried something new, whispers. They floated through the breakfast rush like invisible threads. "Did you hear? They say he found the maid's boy in the trash area. And he didn't fire her? Not only that, he's paying for the kids' school." Some whispered in awe, some in suspicion, some in quiet resentment. In the staff dining room, Diego sat at the edge of a long table, staring at the plate in front of him like it was a dream he might wake up from. Fresh scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, a small bowl of fruit, a glass of milk. He glanced toward the door every few seconds, expecting someone to storm in and shout that it had all been a mistake, that he wasn't supposed to be here, that he needed to go back to hiding. Carla sat beside him, still in uniform, napkin clutched in her hand, shoulders tense. "Eat, mijo," she whispered, "before someone changes their mind." Diego picked up his fork carefully, as if someone might snatch it away. He took a bite of egg, then another, then a piece of toast. It tasted like warmth, like safety, like something he wasn't used to. Across the room, 2 long-term staff members watched. "This is going to cause problems," one murmured. "You'll see." "How?" the other asked. "It's just one kid having breakfast." "Not the breakfast," the first whispered. "The line. If the boss makes exceptions for one maid and her son, what stops others from asking for more?" The head housekeeper, Ms. Duval, walked in then. Her posture was stiff, her expression unreadable. Conversations dropped to a low murmur. She walked past Diego without a word, but her eyes flicked to him, sharp, calculating. Not cruel, but cautious. Later that day, in Alexander's private office, she spoke. "Sir, we need to talk about the new arrangement." Alexander sat at his desk, scrolling through documents on a tablet, but he looked up with a nod. "The boy?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Ms. Duval folded her hands. "While I understand your intentions, we must consider implications. Other staff might assume similar allowances. We have policies for a reason." Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Duval," he said calmly, "do you know how much food we threw away last night?" She hesitated. "I don't have the exact number, sir, but—" "Enough to feed the entire staff and their families," he cut in. "Twice." She pursed her lips. "That may be true. Still, boundaries." "Boundaries," Alexander repeated, his voice still calm but carrying weight, "are meant to protect dignity, not restrict children from eating." Ms. Duval swallowed. "With respect, sir, if this becomes common knowledge, it will become policy," he said. "From now on, leftover food gets repurposed for staff meals where possible, not thrown away. And if an employee's child is hungry, I'd rather see them in the dining room than hiding behind a trash bin." Ms. Duval stared at him, trying to reconcile the man she'd worked under for years with the one speaking now. Something in him had shifted. The marble had cracked, and something human was shining through. "Yes, sir," she finally said. "I'll make the arrangements." She left the room, the world slightly off its axis. Later that evening, as the sun dipped and the mansion settled into its softer evening rhythm, Alexander walked the corridor leading to the staff wing, a place he rarely visited. He paused at the door of the staff dining room. Inside, he saw Diego laughing, actually laughing, as another younger staff member showed him how to balance a spoon on his nose. Carla watched from the end of the table, one hand over her heart like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Alexander smiled faintly. He didn't walk in. He didn't disrupt the moment. He simply watched for a second longer, then turned away. He had nudged fate. Now he had to see what it would become. Time didn't change overnight, but it started to bend. Weeks turned into months. Diego, once invisible, became a small but steady presence in the rhythm of the estate. In the mornings, he'd eat breakfast with staff. Then he'd put on a second-hand school uniform that Alexander had paid for, a bit loose at first, then fitting better as he finally started gaining weight. A car from the estate would drop him at a nearby private school with clean hallways, working heaters, and teachers who took attendance like each name mattered. The first day, he'd walked in terrified. "What if I don't belong here, Mama?" he'd whispered. You belong anywhere you work hard, Carla had said, kissing his forehead. Remember that. The teachers quickly realized something surprising. Diego was quiet, but his mind was sharp. Math, especially, seemed to light something inside him. Numbers, patterns, logic, things that made the world feel like it had rules again. At night, after Carla's shift, they'd sit together in the small staff room, and he'd show her homework filled with equations she didn't fully understand. She would listen anyway, eyes shining. Occasionally, there'd be a knock. 3 firm, familiar taps. Alexander. He never stayed long. Sometimes he simply checked in, sometimes he brought a book or a puzzle game, sometimes he asked to see Diego's grades. They weren't just good. They were exceptional. One evening, Alexander sat at the small table in Carla's modest staff quarters, papers spread out in front of him. These test scores, he said, tapping the page. Do you realize what they mean? Diego shrugged lightly. That I'm okay at math. Alexander laughed, a rare, genuine laugh that startled even himself. Diego, he said, this isn't okay. This is talent. Diego shifted, embarrassed. I just like solving problems. They make sense. People don't always make sense. Numbers do. Alexander's eyes softened. I felt the same way, he admitted. When I was younger, when everything felt out of control, numbers were the one place I could breathe. He paused. How would you feel about coming by my office on Saturdays? Just to see what we do with numbers in the real world. Diego's eyes went wide. Your office? The big one? With the glass walls? Alexander smirked. Yes, that one. Diego glanced at his mother, seeking silent permission. Carla looked at Alexander, then at her son. If you're sure, sir, she said quietly. I don't want him to be a burden. Alexander shook his head. He'd be a reminder. Of what? Diego asked. Alexander smiled faintly. That where you start, he said, doesn't decide where you finish. The first Saturday at the Montclair corporate building, Diego stepped out of the elevator with his backpack clutched to his chest, eyes wide, taking in the mirrored walls, the polished floors, the soft ding of each passing level. Alexander walked beside him, not as the distant owner, but almost like a guardian. They entered the office. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A sweeping view of the city. Multiple monitors lit with charts, data, numbers flowing like streams. Diego's eyes lit up. Whoa. Alexander watched his reaction carefully. This, he said, gently placing a hand on the back of Diego's chair, is what those numbers you're learning in school can turn into. This is how decisions get made. This is how futures are built. Futures like yours. Diego asked. Futures like mine. Alexander paused. And futures like yours. Over the months, those Saturdays became sacred. Alexander would show him how to read basic financial charts, how to understand trends, how to use simple tools. At first, it was basic. Then, one day, Diego leaned over and said, "But, if you adjust that assumption here, won't the projection be off 3 years from now?" Alexander blinked. He double-checked the data. Diego was right. He looked at the boy sitting beside him, leaning over numbers with a focus most adults couldn't sustain, and felt a strange surge of pride. This wasn't charity. This was investment. Not in the financial sense. In the human sense. And somewhere in the middle of those Saturdays, the guilt Alexander had carried for years began to loosen. He couldn't save his younger self, but he was helping save the boy who now sat where he once wished he could. Years passed. The Montclair estate stayed grand, but its atmosphere changed in small, meaningful ways. Food waste dropped. Leftovers consistently went to staff meals or local shelters. Staff children occasionally visited on designated days, not in secret. Carla moved from maid to a supervisory role over time, trusted and respected. And Diego, he outgrew the staff corridor. He finished school, then university, on a scholarship that Alexander quietly arranged but never bragged about. He interned at Montclair Holdings, then got hired, not in a pity position, but because his work spoke for itself. Now, the boy who once hid behind a trash bin walked confidently through glass doors wearing a suit that actually fit. On a particularly important day, the boardroom was filled. Senior executives sat around the long table. Screens glowed with graphs and projections. There was an energy in the air, not unlike the dinner from years ago, but this time, something was different. At the head of the presentation screen stood a young man. Tall now, sharper features, same big, dark eyes. Diego. Good morning, he began, voice steady. Today, I'll be presenting a revised analysis of our long-term portfolio strategy. A few board members exchanged doubtful glances at first. Some still remembered him as the Maid's son. But as he clicked through slides, walked them through data, risks, and opportunities with calm confidence, their skepticism faded. He wasn't just good. He was exceptional. He anticipated questions before they were asked. He knew the numbers deeply. He spoke with a grounding intelligence that made even the toughest executives lean in. When he finished, the room was quiet for a beat. Then, that, one of the partners said slowly, was impressive. More than impressive, another added. That adjustment on the risk model, I hadn't considered that. At the back of the room, half in shadow, stood Alexander. He didn't sit at the table. He didn't need to. He wanted to see this moment from a distance, the way you'd watch a sunrise you'd once only dreamed of. He saw Diego thanking the board, stepping away from the front, cheeks slightly flushed with the adrenaline of having nailed something that mattered. For a brief second, Diego's eyes scanned the room. They found Alexander. Their gazes locked. No words. Just a nod. A silent conversation. You helped me get here. You did the work. You believed in me. You gave me a chance. In that moment, the image overlapped in Alexander's mind. One frame, a small boy crouched behind a trash bin, carrying a plate of food with shaking hands. Another frame, that same boy, standing in a tailored suit before a room of executives, commanding the attention of billion-dollar minds. The distance between those two frames was not chance. It was choice. It was what happens when fate repeats a painful scene, and someone decides to rewrite it. After the meeting, as the room cleared out, Alexander stayed, looking out over the city from the floor-to-ceiling window. The sound of footsteps approached. Mr. Montclair. He turned. Diego stood there, holding a folder, nervous but trying not to show it. How'd I do? He asked. Alexander let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. If I were any of them, I'd be worried for my job. Diego grinned. There was a beat of comfortable silence. You know, Alexander said slowly, the man who found me behind that restaurant when I was a kid. He never got to see where I ended up. He died a few years after. Diego's expression softened. I've always wished I could tell him, Alexander continued, voice slightly thick, that his one act of kindness turned into all of this. He gestured to the office, the company, the life. Tonight, he said, looking at Diego, I feel like I finally told him. Diego swallowed hard. I won't waste what you did for us, he said quietly. Ever. Alexander shook his head gently. You didn't waste it, he replied. You multiplied it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city move below. Cars, people, lives intersecting. Then Alexander said, someday, you're going to see someone the world overlooks. Someone hungry. Someone scared. When that happens... Diego finished the sentence for him. I'll choose the ending too. Alexander smiled. Exactly. Somewhere far from glass towers and marble floors, another boy, in another city, reached into a trash bin behind a building. Somewhere nearby, footsteps approached. What happened next depended on who those footsteps belonged to, on whether someone remembered they had once been hungry too, on whether they believed fate was a curse or an invitation. An invitation to say, this time, it ends differently. If this story moved you even a little, imagine how many Diegos are out there right now, hiding in the shadows of someone else's mansion, office, or city. If you want more billionaire fate stories like this, drop a rewrite fate in the comments, hit like, and make sure you're subscribed, because the next story might be even more shocking than this one.